Remember the days when summer lasted forever, and the only thing between you and pure joy was the playground gate. When a simple toy could spark hours of imagination, competition, and maybe a few scraped knees? Today, we're taking a trip down memory lane to explore 10 vintage toys that absolutely dominated American playgrounds from the 1950s through the 1990s. These weren't just toys, they were cultural phenomena that defined generations of childhoods. So whether you're here for the nostalgia or curious about what kids did before smartphones, buckle up. We're about to rediscover the toys that ruled the concrete kingdoms of America's playgrounds. Let's kick things off with a toy that literally took America by storm in 1958, the hula hoop. When Wham-O released this plastic ring, they couldn't have predicted the mania that followed. Within just 4 months, they sold 25 million hoops. That's right, 25 million. Kids everywhere were gyrating their hips, trying to keep these colorful circles spinning around their waists. Playgrounds became hula hoop battlegrounds. Who could keep it going the longest? Who could do it with 2 hoops? Could you do it around your arms or legs? The craze was so intense that some countries actually banned it, claiming it was improper. But American kids didn't care. They were too busy perfecting their technique and showing off at recess. The hula hoop taught kids coordination, persistence, and gave them bragging rights that lasted until the next big thing came along. Now let's go even further back to a game that's been around for centuries, but had its American playground heyday in the 1950s and 60s. Jacks. All you needed was a small rubber ball and 10 metal jacks, and you had yourself a game. The premise was simple: bounce the ball, pick up jacks, catch the ball before it bounces twice. But mastering it? That was an art form. Kids would huddle in circles on the concrete, calling out onesies, twosies, threesies, as they progressed through increasingly difficult rounds. The satisfying clink of metal jacks became the soundtrack of countless recesses. What made jacks special was its accessibility. It fit in your pocket, cost almost nothing, and could be played anywhere. No fancy equipment needed, just skill, quick reflexes, and a steady hand. Girls especially dominated the jack scene, though anyone could play. It was one of those rare playground activities where size and strength didn't matter, only precision and practice. Speaking of games that required serious skill, let's talk about marbles. For generations of American kids, marbles weren't just toys. They were currency, status symbols, and the center of intense competition. From the 1930s through the 1970s, marble games were playground law. Every kid had their collection: cat's eyes, clearies, steelies, and the prize shooters. You draw a circle in the dirt, and the game was on. The goal? Knock your opponent's marbles out of the ring and claim them as your own. The stakes could get serious. Some kids would come home with pockets full of marbles, while others would lose their entire collection in a single game. This led to some schools actually banning playing for keeps, because too many kids were coming home marbleless and in tears. But beyond the competition, marbles taught negotiation, strategy, and physics. You had to calculate angles, account for the terrain, and develop the perfect flicking technique with your thumb. Next up is a toy that got hearts racing and rhymes flowing: the jump rope. While jumping rope might seem simple, playground jump rope culture was incredibly sophisticated. Kids developed elaborate rhymes, complex double dutch patterns, and acrobatic moves that would impress any athlete. Miss Mary Mac, 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 all dressed in black, black, black. These chants were passed down through generations, evolving with each decade. The rope turners had to maintain perfect rhythm while jumpers performed increasingly difficult tricks: crisscross, double bounce, pepper, speed jumping, and more. Double Dutch took it to another level entirely. 2 ropes turning in opposite directions while 1 or multiple jumpers performed inside. That required coordination, timing, and nerves of steel. Jump rope was more than exercise, it was performance art, social bonding, and competition all rolled into one. And unlike many playground toys, it's one of the few that's remained consistently popular across every generation. In the 1960s and again in the 1990s, one toy made a spectacular comeback: the yo-yo. Dunking yo-yos sent demonstrators to schools across America, performing tricks like walk the dog around the world and rock the baby. Kids would watch in awe, then immediately beg their parents for one. Suddenly, every playground had kids yo-yoing, trying to master the tricks they'd seen. The satisfying thwack of a yo-yo returning to your palm, the concentration required to keep it spinning, sleeping, at the bottom of the string, it was addictive. What made yo-yos special was the progression. You'd start with basic up and down, then graduate to more complex tricks. Some kids became absolute masters, performing in talent shows and competitions. The yo-yo boom of the late 90s introduced high-tech yo-yos with ball bearings that could sleep for minutes. Suddenly, tricks became even more elaborate, and yo-yo culture experienced a renaissance with professional competitions and sponsorships. Want to talk about a toy that was equal parts thrilling and dangerous? Let me introduce the pogo stick. These spring-loaded sticks appeared in playgrounds throughout the 1960s and 70s, promising kids the ability to bounce their way to glory. And bounce they did, sometimes gracefully, often catastrophically. The challenge was simple: how many bounces could you do without falling? But simple didn't mean easy. Balancing on a pogo stick while bouncing required core strength, balance, and a complete disregard for personal safety. Kids would set up obstacle courses, try to break bounce records, and perform tricks that would make any parent's heart stop. The really ambitious ones would attempt to pogo stick to school or race each other down sidewalks. Every playground seemed to have at least one pogo stick legend, that kid who could bounce for 5 minutes straight, or do it backwards or with no hands. They were the daredevils, the ones who inspired everyone else to keep trying despite the inevitable bumps and bruises. The 1980s brought us some truly innovative toys, but few were as addictively simple as Skip It. This ankle bracelet toy with a ball on the end revolutionized solo playground play. You'd slip it around one ankle, swing it around, and jump over it with your other foot. The built-in counter kept track of your skips, turning it into an instant competition. The genius of Skip It was that it made exercise into a game. Kids didn't realize they were getting a workout. They were too busy trying to beat their personal best or their friend's high score. And that click-click-click sound of the counter? That became the music of mid-80s playgrounds everywhere. You could hear it from across the schoolyard, calling other kids to come witness a record-breaking attempt. Now, not every playground toy required athleticism. Some just required style. Enter slap bracelets. These flat metal bands covered in fabric exploded onto the scene in the early 1990s. You'd straighten them out, slap them against your wrist, and snap, instant bracelet. It was oddly satisfying, infinitely repeatable, and every kid needed one. Or 10. Playgrounds became fashion shows of slap bracelets. Kids collected different colors and patterns, traded them like currency, and spent entire recesses slapping them on and off. The sound of dozens of slap bracelets hitting wrists became a symphony of the early 90s. Schools eventually banned them, something about exposed metal edges being dangerous. But by then, slap bracelets had already cemented their place in playground history. Let's bounce over to another 1960s sensation, the Super Ball. Whammo struck gold again with this small, dense rubber ball made of compressed synthetic rubber called Zectron. What made it super? Its incredible bounce. Drop it from shoulder height, and it would bounce back nearly as high. Throw it hard, and it would ricochet unpredictably for what seemed like forever. Playgrounds became Super Ball laboratories. Kids tested how high they could make them bounce, how far, how fast. The really brave ones would throw them as hard as possible, and watch them ping-pong off walls, fences, and occasionally someone's head. teachers dreaded them. One super ball in a classroom could create absolute chaos. But on the playground? They were perfect, small enough to fit in your pocket, cheap enough to replace when you inevitably lost it over the fence, and entertaining enough to create hours of fun. Finally, let's close with a toy that defined 1990s playground culture, the hacky sack. Also called footbags, these small bean-filled pouches created a whole subculture. The game was simple: keep it in the air using any part of your body except your hands. But the execution? That took serious skill. Kids would form circles on the playground, kicking the hacky sack to each other, calling out, "Nice hack!" when someone pulled off a particularly smooth move. The really skilled players developed tricks, kicks, stalls, and combos that looked like juggling with your feet. What made hacky sack special was its inclusive vibe. It wasn't about winning or losing, it was about keeping the flow going, supporting each other, and just vibing out. It brought together kids who might not normally interact, united by their desire to keep that little bag airborne. There you have it, 10 toys that dominated American playgrounds across multiple generations. From the hula hoop craze of the 50s to the hacky sack circles of the 90s, these simple objects created countless memories, taught valuable skills, and brought kids together. What made these toys special wasn't their complexity, or their graphics, or their connectivity. They were special because they required imagination, encouraged physical activity, and fostered real social interaction. You had to actually play with other kids, negotiate rules, handle victory and defeat face to face. Sure, today's kids have incredible technology and toys we could only dream of. But there was something magical about those analog playgrounds: the sound of jacks on concrete, the rhythm of jump rope chants, the satisfaction of a perfectly executed yo-yo trick. These toys didn't just rule playgrounds, they ruled our childhoods. And for those of us lucky enough to have experienced them, they'll forever hold a special place in our hearts. What about you? Which of these toys brings back the strongest memories? What would you add to this list? The playground may have changed, but the memories remain. Thanks for taking this trip down memory lane with me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to see if I can still do around the world with a yo-yo. Wish me luck.